I'm happy to be here to talk about mobile esports, which we haven't heard so much from today. We're going to dive deeper into that with a couple of the companies that are pioneers in this space, Super Evil and Skillz. And I'm going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So, Uyen, let's start.
Hi, I'm Uyen Tanu. I head up marketing at Super Evil MegaCorp, and we make Vainglory, a very delightful core gaming experience for touch.
Casey Chafkin. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and founder of Skillz. Skillz is the leading esports technology provider for game developers. So we provide the back-end esports services for about 3,000 game developers, and that's everything from their amateur kind of PvP competitions all the way up through large-scale, multi-thousand person brand-sponsored tournaments.
So I wrote a lot about Vainglory when it debuted in 2014, and it was always sort of billed as hardcore on mobile. You guys got to go up on stage with Apple when they introduced that idea, I guess. But esports wasn't really in the picture in the beginning. So I wondered sort of like how did esports come into the picture as your startup was evolving here?
Yeah, to be frank, you don't really develop a game for esport. You develop gaming experience for your audience, right? And when we first started doing this, we very much were focused on building out Vainglory, and our community very quickly let us know that they were ready. And so we started seeing tournaments pop up on Twitch where people were creating artificial scenarios upon which they could host tournaments with spectator slots. And so we quickly went back, and our chief creative actually spent an entire week building in a spectator seat, which we had not planned for much further down the road. And that was kind of something that is very much a part of the identity of Super Evil. Just yesterday, actually, Apple released a developer insights on Vainglory and how we see community and philosophy, and how we wrap our community into developing Vainglory. And in that is very much when our community told us that they were ready for esports was when we started to build features in the game that really spoke to that.
And Casey, how did esports come into your picture then as well?
So we were looking at the space as it was evolving, and we were looking at it in 2012, and we saw what was happening on PC and console, and we saw what mobile was doing in terms of the democratization of games among players. So very, very quickly becoming the most popular gaming platform in history. Our intrinsic belief is that competition is an essential part of gaming, and so from gaming comes competitive gaming. From competitive gaming comes professional level gaming and spectatorship. And so when we looked at the space, the average developer was spending about $150,000 to build a mobile game in 2012, and that just doesn't get you very far if you're trying to build a robust multiplayer ecosystem, which is kind of the bedrock on which you need to build a sport. And so we set out to build infrastructure technology that would allow game developers to focus on what they do best, which is building engaging interactive experiences. And we set out to provide the back-end services from player management, anti-cheating, anti-fraud that would allow those games to become sports.
So I guess one of the questions the audience probably has is like, how does this get to the stage where League of Legends is? And what is the nuance that we can offer here about how mobile is different from the PC or where other esports are today? So that's what we'd like to try to get to here. Maybe for starters, how is the mobile audience different?
Well, I think for one, when thinking about mobile esports compared to esports at large, it's still very much a fledgling kind of niche area, right? But the potential for growth in mobile esports is astronomical, and when you just look at things such as the sheer numbers alone, currently there are roughly 700 million devices that are able or capable of running a AAA title, whereas we collectively around the world have roughly 3 billion devices that can run something like Vainglory. So the addressable audience in and of itself is massive, right? And in thinking about the type of gamers that are on the mobile platform today, a lot of those folks are native touch generation first gamers. And I think that up until today, the gaming experiences that live on mobile have been very different. And what the Super Evil collective dream has been for us was to create the types of core gaming experiences that we fell in love with as gamers, and in the sense of skill-based, strategy-based, to be able to play the types of games with your friends that you remember staying up very late in LAN parties in our youth.
I think what we see is not just a size difference, it's a self-perception difference. So mobile gamers don't see themselves as gamers. So the average player on Skillz is playing 58 minutes a day, and they are self-described as a non-gamer or casual gamer, and that's with almost an hour of consumption every day. And so I think when we think about the maturity of the space and the audience, a lot of it just has to do with where the audience sees themselves in their evolutionary history. So like when we were talking beforehand, we talked about if you were to poll the audience and ask people if they play sports in here, almost everyone would have some sort of interaction or relationship to sports. They'd say, like, I play golf on the weekends, but I'm terrible, or I played field hockey in college, or I go running before work, and that they see themselves as part of the sports ecosystem. The mobile gamer today doesn't see themselves as part of the esports ecosystem, even though they're actively participating in competitions, and that they are becoming the kind of base level of a healthy sports ecosystem, which is the amateur level of competition.
So it's interesting to look at a game like Clash Royale as a kind of a MOBA. It's real time, right? Vainglory seems to be like in the middle, and League of Legends is on the other spectrum. I can't grasp League of Legends. I mean, it's a little too fast for me, right? But Vainglory is actually in the middle, and I can actually understand what my role is within this team. And it's an interesting place as far as where you guys designed the game to be, right? I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are a couple commonalities when you think about those three games. And, in one of our earlier conversations today, Casey and I were discussing just the sense of when games become, or as gamers identify themselves as a gamer, and what that gateway drug is, right? And so when we think about Vainglory and we think about League and Clash, is the sense of the real-time experience that's very different from what's on mobile today, the sense of strategy and the sense of skill-based gaming, and I think that you can certainly tie that thread between those three games in and of itself, but also that as games become mass, and then the mid and the very much core, is that the rising tides very much raises all boats, right? Is that as we bring gamers into the loop, or as we bring the types of gamers who don't traditionally identify as gamers, and they learn certain skills and they have certain experiences that really pull them in and engage them and help them identify as gamers at the end of the day.
Now, I guess, how do you guys also feel about addressing, say, the amateur layer versus the professional layer as well?
I think the amateur layer necessarily has to exist in order to have a professional layer. So, and I think it's easy to forget, but football wasn't football when it was invented. It was a game that nobody played. Then it was a game that a bunch of people played, and then there was self-organized competition. From self-organized competition, you have player-funded tournaments. You then have third-party organized tournaments, and then people start gathering around the field to watch these third-party organized tournaments or the player-funded tournaments, and so you start enabling viewership through the construction of a stadium or through broadcasting. But the professional level can't possibly exist without the amateur level, and so I think we've taken, or the approach that my company has taken has been a bottoms-up approach, where we're saying we're going to enable competitive gaming starting with the amateur level, and then building on top of that as there's demand from that ecosystem to play in organized competitions with prizes, and then to enable professionals out of that class of gamer.
And when we think about the amateur and the professional level, for us, it's very much the difference between the community and the pro players, right? Last week alone, we made an announcement of a few multi-esport organizations joining Vainglory, and that very much feeds in the ecosystem. But when you think about it, it is very much about the community and the spectators of the sport. There really is no sense of a professional or an athlete, rather, until there is a community of folks that are rallied around the game, the sport, and to watch them and to spectate. And I think the audience is what matters.
So I think a lot of the question in the room is always around when's the right time to invest in this? Is this really going to be a thing 10 years from now or 5 years from now? How early do you want to get into it? And I guess an interesting observation about that is I think people said the same about just mobile in general. And now we have, the Super Bowl where, the way to reach people really this year was probably on mobile, right? So it's an interesting how that for many years was viewed as sort of the stepchild platform, I guess, and it's flipping, right?
Yeah.
How do you guys think about that? Or also, what are some milestones that show you that there's a lot of forward progress that this is making towards being, a bigger deal?
I think it's very much about the audience. Again, as the audience shift to certain platforms, very much brands will follow and games, speak for itself. But when you think about some of the platform changes or broadcasting changes, even in the last 12 months, the big pivot from Facebook, from YouTube, and how much mobile traffic those two platforms command and that focus on gaming really speaks to where the industry is headed when you think about mobile. And so between those two, I think that when you start to look at milestones for mobile esports and you start to look at what is the next thing or when do I hop in, you start to see, yes, mobile esports is still very small, but the potential for growth there is massive. So Vainglory alone, our viewership in the past year on esports grew by 10x, right? And 10x, that is very much just the beginning.
Mm-hmm. And I think we have a slightly different perspective on where we are. Certainly in the grand scheme of things, mobile esports are closer to the beginning than they are to the end. But I think they're actually a lot bigger than people realize today. And so we recently published data on the winners, 2016 mobile esports winners on our platform. And so the 5th highest earning esports athlete in the US was playing a finger bowling game called Strike Bowling, and it's not that mobile is much more distributed, I think, than PC and console gaming, and so the competitions are much more fragmented. So that person was playing 10 to 14 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week, playing in literally thousands of small-scale competitions to win $390,000 over the course of a year. And I think this is the organic construction of sports, where you start with people playing and they play competitively. And so I think the first thing that I'd say is I think it's bigger already than people realize. It's just much more fragmented. And then if you're trying to measure velocity of that in terms of the growth trajectory, I think it's pretty important to think about the age of mobile as a platform. So, what the App Store is about 8 years old right now. When Facebook IPO'd, they basically acted like mobile was an afterthought. And so we've only been in the current age of mobile development for about 4 years. And so to look at the distance that we've covered in that time period, I think is very telling in terms of where mobile's going to be. I believe that in the next 2 years, mobile will be more than half of all esports.
So Casey, you've got some people who are making a full-time living on your platform, right?
We do, and they're playing games that I don't think people would have historically considered to be esports. They'd say, well, that's a finger bowling game on your phone, and so how could that possibly be an esport? Or this person's playing a bubble popping game competitively. And I think it speaks to the idea that competition is intrinsic in gaming, and so you start with the content that's available. And I guess Super Evil was starting out right around the same time Skillz was, but there weren't games there weren't MOBAs on mobile in 2012 when we launched, and so the biggest competitive competitive games today on Skillz are a function of the games that existed in 2013, basically. And so when you talk to these players, though, they talk about it in the exact same terms that physical athletes do, or what you might consider traditional athletes do. They talk about the grip for their phone. We've had players talk to us about dripping candle wax on their screen to get the right level of tensile friction between their finger and the screen itself. And I don't think these are people who initially set out. I think these are people who said, I'm not a gamer, and then they find themselves earning a living doing this thing. And that's I think how the industry is evolving on mobile.
So Super Evo has had interesting announcements of new teams that have come on board. The Immortals, Fanatics. These are very professional esports organizations that are joining. Right?
So we announced last week that the 5 organizations were joining, and we actually have an upcoming announcement this upcoming week. But the biggest signal there is that these esports organizations are seeing a future in mobile esports, and certainly a future in Vainglory, and making a bet for that future, right? And in entering Vainglory, they're also creating or further adding to a very healthy ecosystem so that players can play Vainglory professionally. They can be a part of these team houses, can train, and teams like Fnatic and TSM are taking what they've learned in managing and growing their teams from other sports into Vainglory. And so the future is there, and we've worked with some big brands this past year and also some big organizations where we all see where the future is headed, and it's very much mobile.
So what's on the roadmap for you guys, and what's coming next?
So we've added a few things in the past couple of updates. The biggest thing is what we're creating a sense of a brawl mode, so shorter sessions. Vainglory very much right now is a 15 to 20 minute game, and when you think about mobile gaming and you're thinking about the attention span of a typical mobile gamer, you may very much have to ease them into that. And so we've created these really fun 5-minute experiences so that people can very much, 1, learn the objectives of it, and 2, just very much exist in that short time span, but experience Vainglory end to end.
Okay.
I think for us, the big thing that we're focused on is leveraging the technological integration that we have with our developers to facilitate a better spectator experience. And I think it's our vision aligns pretty well actually with some of the things that Steve was just talking about in terms of today we're watching esports competitions through a rotating heads-up display, and that'd be like watching a basketball game via GoPro footage, and that's crazy. We're watching 90% or more of most esports broadcasts are live content, and if you look at an NFL football game, it's a 3-hour broadcast for 11 minutes of live action, and the other 2 hours and 49 minutes are dedicated to helping the spectators understand what's going on and why they should care. And so for us, when we think about future roadmap, we're building out an increasing layer of tools and integration points for streamers to enable their audiences to better comprehend the action of what's going on, and to enable true interactive programming where the broadcast isn't just one person playing or a small group of people playing and the streamer disseminating that. It's open competitions where people can both chat in the chat room on Twitch and join in the competition themselves.
So do we have some questions from the audience here?
Yeah, let's take some questions. Anybody have questions for these guys about mobile gaming and where it's going? As you guys think about your questions, I'm curious. I want to dive in a little bit deeper. Oh, we have a question right here. Sorry, wait till the mic comes up. Right up front. Sorry, I missed you. I was looking in the back. We got a question right over here. Thanks.
Thank you. Will the next generation of devices, including the inclusion of AR, significantly impact the growth of competitive gaming on the mobile front, in your opinion?
I think that there's some really exciting things coming along with AR. So we built a proprietary game engine that allows us to do virtually anything, right? And so the Evil engine right now, and it has how we think about AR in the future, is that there's some really exciting opportunities when it comes to spectation. bringing the audience along for the ride wherever they are versus in the stadium alone. And I think that experience is really exciting, right? And not only from what you're seeing on the screen, but maybe you look left and there's an API that feeds in stats so that you're seeing every single player's, KDA. Or perhaps you're in the bush and you can control where you are on the map and you're experiencing the game within your controls and not necessarily within the hands of somebody who says this is the experience that you should view.
One of these days we'll get player versus player on Pokemon Go, right?
Yeah, right. We might have time for one more question if there's a question out there. I don't see one. So otherwise, I just real quickly, you dive a little bit more deeply into brands and how brands can activate into mobile e-games, how it might be different from some of the more traditional esports, and what that looks like for brands on both your platforms.
Certainly for us, I think it's, the big difference is distributed competition versus largely centralized competition. And so from a brand activation perspective, the sponsorship opportunities have a much larger potential reach, but don't necessarily have the same kind of statement level impact in terms of saying like we're the official sponsor of the international or something like that. And so I think the brands that we're working with though are most excited about reaching players in an interactive way. And what I mean by that is, we have our first kind of interactive television broadcasts happening now, where we've had TV stations approach us about having mobile esports competitions as the broadcast content that anyone can play in at home and both participate. They're both a spectator and a participant. And so I think the level of integration for brands as they're able to is much deeper when you can interact with the player spectator as opposed to just speaking to the spectator.
Cool.
We've worked with brands in a variety of different ways on Vainglory, and so there are the obvious things where you, one, host a tournament, or two, sponsor a team, but the opportunity for us to deeply engage with a brand within the game, for example. We can pull in brands in Vainglory into the fold. We can connect different brands with teams. I think it really just depends on what the message is that you're trying to get across, whether that be you're promoting the hardware, and perhaps then in that scenario there's an invitational. Like just for example, last year we did a World Invitational with Samsung because Vainglory is such a rich, beautiful game that runs on amazing graphics. That is the opportunity to show off your hardware, or perhaps there is a sense of sponsoring the teams directly to support the ecosystem. So Vainglory, I think the limits are a bit endless when it comes to how we work with brands.